The fluorescent lights in Fort Lewis's Logistics Processing Center hummed their familiar tune as Tessa Morgan sorted through another stack of supply requisitions. Aero 215 hours, the dead zone of night shift, when even the coffee tasted like regret. She'd been doing this for 7 years. Same desk, same routine, same faded military jacket that had seen better days. No one paid attention to the woman who made sure toilet paper and ammunition reached forward operating bases on time. Lieutenant Brad Stevens strutted through the warehouse like he owned it. His butter bars still shiny from OCS, clipboard in hand for his first official inspection. At 23, fresh from leadership training that emphasized maintaining standards, he was hunting for violations like a bloodhound. When his eyes landed on Tessa's jacket, military issue but worn by a civilian, he'd found his target. "Ma'am, that's an unauthorized uniform item," Stevens announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that only comes from inexperience. "Remove it immediately. Wearing military attire as a civilian is stolen valor." The night shift workers looked up from their stations, sensing drama in their usually mundane world. Someone pulled out a phone because everything needed to be recorded these days. What happened next would shatter the careful anonymity Tessa Morgan had built around herself like armor. Fort Lewis sprawled across the Washington landscape like a small city. Its logistics center, the unglamorous heart that kept the military machine running. In 2024, the base hummed with activity around the clock, processing everything from MREs to sophisticated weapon systems. The night shift at Building 47 was staffed by a mix of active duty personnel pulling extra hours, civilian contractors chasing better pay, and veterans who couldn't quite let go of military life. Tessa Morgan fell into none of these categories, though everyone assumed she was the latter. At 34, she moved with an economy of motion that suggested military training, but her personnel file listed only basic qualifications: forklift certification, hazmat handling, security clearance level secret. She'd started in 2017, worked nights exclusively, never called in sick, never complained, never socialized beyond basic pleasantries. The jacket she wore had become her signature, an old Army combat uniform top, sun-faded from desert deployment, all patches and name tapes removed. She wore it over civilian clothes, a combination that irritated regulation sticklers but hadn't warranted official attention until tonight. Her co-workers had theories. Maybe she'd washed out of basics. Maybe she had a military boyfriend. Maybe she was just another civilian playing soldier. Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez had worked logistics for 25 years, seen every type of person pass through these warehouses. Something about Tessa had always bothered him, not in a bad way, but like a puzzle missing pieces. The way she'd unconsciously come to attention when the national anthem played over the speakers, how she could calculate load distributions in her head faster than computers, the 1,000-yard stare that appeared when helicopters flew overhead. Lieutenant Stevens represented everything wrong with peacetime military young officers more concerned with regulation than reality, confusing leadership with nitpicking. His father was a full-bird colonel, his military academy ring a size too large for his finger, his understanding of actual combat limited to PowerPoint presentations. He'd arrived at Fort Lewis 2 weeks ago, determined to make his mark through attention to detail. The warehouse itself told the story of modern warfare. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with everything from bootlaces to body armor. Forklifts hummed between aisles while workers processed orders from units worldwide. The night shift handled priority shipments, the ones marked urgent, the ones that meant someone somewhere needed something yesterday. It was unglamorous work that saved lives, though most people never made that connection. Tessa's workspace reflected her personality: organized, efficient, devoid of personal touches. No photos, no decorations, just stacks of processed orders and a coffee mug that had seen better decades. She worked with mechanical precision, each movement practiced, each form filled out perfectly. 7 years of perfect performance reviews that said nothing about who she really was. The truth was written on her body in scars and ink, hidden beneath long sleeves and silence. The jacket wasn't a fashion statement or wannabe militarism. It was a shroud, a daily reminder of weight she carried. But that truth was classified beyond Stephen's clearance level, beyond most people's comprehension, buried in files that didn't officially exist about a mission that never happened. Stephen's inspection had started routinely enough. He'd found dust on emergency exit signs, expired fire extinguishers, the usual minor infractions that justified his existence. The night shift workers had tolerated his presence with the resigned patience of people who'd seen young officers come and go. Then he'd reached Tessa's station, and his regulation radar had pinged hard. "I'm talking to you," Stephen said louder when Tessa didn't immediately respond, still focused on entering a priority medical supply order for a unit in Poland. "That jacket is military property. You're in violation of Article 134 of the UCMJ and federal law regarding military impersonation." Tessa's fingers paused over her keyboard. 7 years of invisibility, shattered by someone who couldn't distinguish between honoring service and stealing valor. She turned slowly, meeting Stephen's eyes with a gaze that had seen too much to be intimidated by brass. "I'll say it again," Stevens continued, mistaking her silence for defiance. "Remove that jacket immediately or I'm calling security police. This is stolen valor, plain and simple." He pulled out his phone, ready to document his righteous bust. Other workers had stopped pretending to work, the drama too compelling to ignore. "Lieutenant," Master Sergeant Rodriguez intervened, recognizing something dangerous in Tessa's stillness. "Maybe we could handle this." "Stay out of this, Sergeant," Stevens snapped. "I'm addressing a clear violation. Ma'am, I won't ask again. That jacket comes off now, or you're detained for impersonating military personnel." The warehouse had gone cemetery quiet, except for the hum of refrigeration units storing medical supplies. Tessa stood with the careful balance of someone calculating odds, weighing 7 years of anonymity against a confrontation she'd always known might come. Her hands moved to her jacket zipper with deliberate slowness. "You want the jacket off?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the silence. "You sure about that?" "Lieutenant," Stevens puffed up, sensing victory. "Absolutely. And after that, we'll discuss your employment status. Fort Lewis has no room for people who disrespect military service." Tessa unzipped the jacket with steady hands that had once held pressure on arterial wounds while under fire. Beneath, she wore a simple black T-shirt, her arms covered by long sleeves despite the warehouse warmth. She folded the jacket with military precision, placed it on her desk, then looked Stevens directly in the eye. "You want to talk about disrespecting military service?" she asked. "Let's talk." She rolled up her left sleeve with the same deliberate motion, revealing scarred skin that looked like a topographical map of pain. But it wasn't the scars that made Rodriguez's coffee cup slip from his hand. It was the tattoo. Black ink against damaged skin, a dagger piercing a torn American flag. D-17, inscribed below in numbers that seemed to bleed. "Holy fuck," someone whispered. Phones that had been recording suddenly lowered. Stevens' face cycled through confusion to recognition to something approaching terror. Master Sergeant Rodriguez moved first, his quarter-century of service recognizing symbols that weren't taught in basic training. "Delta-17," he breathed, the words hanging in the air like a ghost. "Syria, March 2018. You're supposed to be dead. They're all supposed to be dead." The warehouse atmosphere shifted from drama to something heavier. Younger workers looked confused, but the veterans present understood they were witnessing something profound. Delta-17 wasn't common knowledge, it was whispered history, the kind of story that became legend in military circles. A medical response unit deployed to a classified location. 7 specialists sent to provide emergency care to a forward operating base that didn't officially exist. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Tessa said calmly, still holding Stevens' gaze. "You seem familiar with history. Want to fill in the lieutenant here? He seems confused about what constitutes military service." Rodriguez's voice shook slightly as he spoke. "March 15th, 2018. Delta-17 was overrun during a coordinated attack. Communications went dark. Rescue teams found the base destroyed. 7 medical personnel listed as KIA, closed casket funerals. Families told it was a training accident. 6, Tessa corrected quietly. 6 funerals. 1 survivor who wasn't supposed to exist. Stevens had gone pale, his phone hanging forgotten in his hand. That's impossible. The records say what they need to say." Tessa interrupted. "Just like my personnel file says I'm a civilian contractor with no prior service. Just like the official report doesn't mention the 12 soldiers from the 75th Rangers who were at that base, wounded, waiting for extraction that wasn't coming." She rolled up her right sleeve, revealing more scars, more ink, 6 names tattooed in a column: Martinez, Johnson, Park, Williams, Thompson, Davis. "My unit," she said simply, "the ones who didn't make it out." The story emerged in fragments, each detail adding weight to the silence. The base had been hit at dawn, mortar fire followed by ground assault. The medical station, supposedly protected by Geneva Convention, had been specifically targeted. Tessa, then Staff Sergeant Morgan, had been treating a ranger with a sucking chest wound when the first rounds hit. "We held for 6 hours," she continued, her voice steady but distant. "Set up a casualty collection point in the motor pool. When it became clear no help was coming, that the enemy wanted the base intact for the intelligence value, I made a decision." Rodriguez knew this part from the whispered stories. The fuel depot. Someone detonated the fuel depot. denied the enemy the base, created enough chaos for the Rangers to escape and evade. Someone, Tessa agreed. Someone who knew the blast radius, knew where to position the wounded for maximum protection, knew they'd have 90 seconds to reach minimum safe distance. She touched the scars on her arms. Turns out, 90 seconds wasn't quite enough. Stevens found his voice, though it cracked. Why? Why aren't you listed as surviving? Why hide? Because Staff Sergeant Morgan died in that blast, Tessa said. The person they pulled out of the rubble 3 days later, burned beyond recognition, carrying 6 sets of dog tags. That person didn't want to exist anymore, didn't want medals or recognition or to be paraded around as the sole survivor. That person just wanted to keep serving, quietly, where no one would thank her for living when better people died. The weight of revelation hung in the warehouse like smoke from a distant fire. Stevens stood frozen, his entire worldview built on regulations and proper channels crumbling before a reality too raw for his training to process. The phone in his hand felt like an accusation. He'd been seconds away from publicly humiliating a hero whose sacrifice eclipsed anything in his limited experience. "I need to report this," Stephen stammered, falling back on protocol when faced with the incomprehensible. "Your status, your records, this needs to go through proper channels." "No," Tessa said firmly, "it doesn't. I've spent 7 years building this life, Lieutenant. 7 years processing supply orders, making sure units have what they need, trying to balance the scales. You file that report, and everything unravels." Rodriguez stepped between them, his bulk a protective barrier. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, shut your mouth and think. This isn't about regulations. This is about a woman who gave everything and asked for nothing in return." But Stevens, young and idealistic and tragically naive, couldn't let it go. "There are procedures. If she's active duty listed as KIA, there's insurance fraud. There's a 23-year-old butter bar who doesn't understand when to shut up." A new voice interrupted. Colonel Martha Hayes entered the warehouse, having been monitoring the situation through security cameras. At 55, with silver eagles and a Ranger tab, she commanded attention through presence alone. "Lieutenant Stevens, you're relieved. Report to my office at Ushers 800. Stevens saluted and fled, leaving his clipboard behind like a discarded weapon. Hayes approached Tessa slowly, reading body language honed by decades of service. "Tessa Morgan," she said softly, "or do you prefer Staff Sergeant?" "Just Tessa," came the reply. "Staff Sergeant Morgan is dead, ma'am. Has been for 6 years. Hayes studied the tattoo, the scars, the woman who'd chosen anonymity over a claim. "I know," she said finally. "I've known since you applied here. Did you think a Delta survivor could walk onto my base without me noticing?" The revelation hit Tessa like a physical blow. 7 years of careful anonymity shattered. "You knew. I commanded the reaction force that found you," Hayes said quietly. "Held your hand in the medevac bird while you screamed 6 names over and over. When you disappeared from Walter Reed, when the official story became 7 KIA, I understood. Sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to keep living, even if that life is in shadows." Tessa's composure finally cracked. 7 years of suppressed emotion leaked through as tears tracked down scarred cheeks. "They trusted me," she whispered. "Medical personnel, non-combatants. I was supposed to keep them safe." "You saved 12 Rangers," Hayes countered. "Your decision, your sacrifice, gave them the distraction they needed to escape. They've gone on to serve with distinction, knowing they owe their lives to Delta-17. "To my team," Tessa corrected. "Martinez held the perimeter while I moved the wounded. Johnson ran triage even after taking shrapnel. Park was 22, ma'am. First deployment. Kept cracking jokes even when—" She stopped, lost in memory. The warehouse had become a confessional, night shift workers bearing witness to pain usually buried in classified files. Rodriguez quietly ushered people back to their stations, giving Tessa space while maintaining security. Some moments deserved privacy, even in public spaces. "I can't go back to being her," Tessa said finally. Staff Sergeant Morgan believed in the system, in recognition, in medals meaning something. That person burned up with the fuel depot. All I want is to serve quietly, to make sure supply chains work, to ensure no unit goes without because someone forgot to file paperwork." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then that's what you'll do. But Tessa, carrying this alone, it's killing you slowly. The night shifts, the isolation, the jacket you're performing penance for a sin that doesn't exist. 6 people died under my command," Tessa shot back. 6 medics who trusted me to keep them safe. Every supply order I process, every shipment I expedite, it's not penance. It's a promise. Never again will someone die because logistics failed. In the brutal mathematics of command, hung between them the calculus that traded lives for objectives, that weighed 6 against 12 and called it victory. Hayes had made similar calculations, carried similar ghosts. The difference was she'd had support, structure, a system designed to help warriors process trauma. Tessa had chosen exile, creating her own prison from survivor's guilt. "What happens now?" Tessa asked, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Stevens will talk. People recorded. My cover's blown." Hayes pulled out her phone, typed quickly. "Stevens is being transferred to a supply depot in Alaska. The recordings will be handled. Your secret is safe, if that's what you want. But Tessa, I'm ordering you not asking to see someone, Dr. Chen at the Veterans Center. She specializes in survivor trauma. Off the books. No records. I don't need—" "That's an order," Hayes interrupted, "from one soldier to another. You've carried this alone long enough." The confrontation's aftermath rippled through Fort Lewis like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Within hours, the night shift workers had been quietly briefed on operational security, the importance of forgetting what they'd witnessed. Most complied readily. They'd seen a hero's pain laid bare and wanted no part in exploiting it. The few who'd recorded video found their phones mysteriously wiped, a reminder that some secrets carried weight beyond social media likes. Stevens' transfer happened with military efficiency. His belongings were packed, orders cut, and by noon he was on a transport to Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, where he'd spend the next 2 years learning about logistics from the ground up. His final act at Fort Lewis was a handwritten letter to Tessa, delivered by Rodriguez. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand. Thank you for your service and for the lesson in what real sacrifice looks like." Tessa returned to work the next night, expecting awkwardness or unwanted attention. Instead, she found subtle changes. Her coffee mug had been replaced with a new one, no logos or slogans, just quality ceramic that kept drinks hot through long shifts. Her chair had been upgraded to something ergonomic, small improvements that said, "We see you," without making a fuss. The jacket remained on her desk that first night back, folded with military precision. She stared at it for a long moment before Rodriguez appeared at her shoulder. "You don't have to wear it," he said quietly, "but you don't have to hide it either. Your choice, your terms." "It was never about the jacket," Tessa replied. "It was about remembering. Every time I put it on, I carried them with me. Martinez, Johnson, Park, Williams, Thompson, Davis." Rodriguez finished. "We know their names now. We'll remember them too." The warehouse had developed its own memorial tradition. Each night at Oro 3:15, the time Delta-17 had gone dark, someone would quietly place 6 coffee cups on the break-room table. No ceremony, no speeches, just acknowledgement. Tessa discovered it by accident a week later, finding the cups arranged with military precision, steam rising from fresh coffee no one would drink. Dr. Chen proved to be everything Hayes had promised, a former combat medic herself. She understood the unique guilt medical personnel carried when patients died despite best efforts. Their sessions, held in unmarked offices away from the main veteran center, became Tessa's weekly anchor. Slowly, painfully, she began processing 6 years of suppressed grief. "You're not betraying them by living," Chen said during one session. "You're honoring them by continuing the mission. Every life saved through your logistics work is a victory for Delta-17." 3 months after the confrontation, Tessa made a decision. She arrived at work wearing a new jacket, still civilian clothes, but with a small pin on the collar, the Medical Corps insignia barely visible unless you knew to look. It was compromise between hiding and proclaiming, between Tessa Morgan and Staff Sergeant Morgan. Hayes visited monthly, always during night shift, always with fresh coffee and conversation that ranged from logistics challenges to processing trauma. She never pushed, never demanded, just provided presence and understanding. During one visit, she mentioned the Rangers Tessa had saved. "They ask about you," Hayes said carefully. "Not for details, just they want to know their angel is okay." "Angel?" Tessa snorted. "Angels don't blow up fuel depots." "No," Hayes agreed. "Angels make impossible choices to save lives. Warriors blow up fuel depots. You were both that day." The warehouse operations continued with quiet efficiency. Supply orders processed, shipments expedited, the unglamorous work that kept soldiers alive around the world. Tessa remained at her desk, night after night, but something had shifted. The isolation had cracked, allowing connections to seep through. She learned her co-workers' names, their stories, their own service histories or lack thereof. Maria Gonzalez, the forklift operator, had lost a brother in Afghanistan. James Park, no relation to her Park, just cosmic coincidence, processed ammunition orders with obsessive precision because his unit had once run dry during a firefight. Even civilians like Danny Chin carried their own weights, working nights to pay for nursing school, hoping to serve in his own way. We all have our reasons for being here. Rodriguez told her one night, "Yours are just written in deeper ink." A year after the stolen Valor accusation that wasn't Fort Lewis's logistics center had transformed in subtle but significant ways. The night shift, once a collection of individuals working in parallel isolation, had become something more cohesive, not through mandatory team building or command directives, but through the organic understanding that everyone carried stories. Everyone served in their own way. Tessa remained at her desk, processing orders with the same precision, but no longer in isolation. Her expertise in medical supply logistics had been quietly recognized, leading to unofficial consultations on critical shipments. When a forward surgical team in Africa faced supply shortages, it was Tessa who recognized the pattern of requests, anticipated needs, and expedited shipments that arrived before they were desperately needed. "How did you know we'd need extra type O negative?" a surgeon had asked during a video conference, amazement clear in his voice. "Experience," Tessa had replied simply, not mentioning that Delta-17 had faced the same shortage, that Johnson had died trying to donate directly to wounded Rangers because they'd run out of blood products. The 6 coffee cups continued their nightly vigil, but the memorial had evolved. Photos appeared not of Delta-17, those remained classified, but of other medical personnel who had given their lives in service. The break room wall became an informal shrine to combat medics, flight nurses, surgical teams who'd paid the ultimate price. Each image was carefully researched, respectfully displayed, creating a tapestry of sacrifice that contextualized Tessa's loss within a larger tradition. Dr. Chen's sessions had helped Tessa navigate the complex terrain between survivor's guilt and survivor's purpose. "You're not living instead of them," Chen had explained. "You're living in addition to them. Your continued service adds to their legacy, doesn't diminish it." The jacket, that faded piece of military surplus that had started everything, now hung in Tessa's apartment, retired but not discarded. She'd had it professionally cleaned and preserved, along with 6 sets of dog tags that would never be officially returned to families who'd buried empty caskets. On difficult nights, she'd hold those tags, feeling their weight, remembering their owners not as victims, but as healers who'd stayed at their posts. Colonel Hayes instituted subtle policy changes based on lessons learned. Background checks for civilian contractors became more thorough, but also more understanding, recognizing that some veterans chose anonymity for valid reasons. A quiet support network developed for those carrying classified trauma, providing resources without requiring disclosure. Lieutenant Stevens, from his exile in Alaska, had become an unexpected advocate for logistics excellence. His social media posts, carefully scrubbed of identifying details, spoke about the importance of supply chains, the heroes who worked in warehouses, the lives saved by timely shipments. He never mentioned Delta-17, but those who knew the story recognized his penance and growth. The Rangers Tessa had saved went on to distinguished careers, each carrying the knowledge that they owed their lives to 7 medics who'd held the line. Master Sergeant Williams, promoted and decorated, established a scholarship fund for combat medic training. Captain Thompson pioneered new casualty evacuation procedures. Staff Sergeant Davis became an instructor teaching tactical combat casualty care with an intensity born from personal experience. None of them knew Tessa Morgan worked nights at Fort Lewis, processing the supply orders that supported their missions. That anonymity was her choice, her shield against a gratitude too heavy to bear. But they remembered Delta-17 in their own ways, ensuring the sacrifice wasn't forgotten even if it remained officially unacknowledged. Rodriguez retired 2 years later, his farewell speech carefully generic, except for one line, "I've learned that heroes don't always wear uniforms, and the quietest person in the room might be the one who's already given everything." His eyes found Tessa in the crowd, a silent salute between warriors who understood that some battles were fought with keyboards and forklifts rather than rifles. The new night shift supervisor, Captain Angela Morrison, had been thoroughly briefed by Hayes. She understood that Tessa Morgan was both civilian contractor and something more, that the woman processing routine supply orders had once made decisions that traded lives for objectives and lived with the consequences. Morrison provided support through respectful distance, ensuring Tessa had what she needed without intrusion. 5 years after the confrontation, Tessa accepted a promotion to logistics planning supervisor. The position required day shift work, interaction with multiple departments, visibility she'd avoided for so long, but Dr. Chen had helped her understand that hiding forever dishonored her team's memory as much as false glory would have. They were healers, Chen reminded her. They'd want you to heal too, to lead, to prevent future Delta-17s through better planning and support. The transition wasn't easy. Daylight felt exposing after years of night work. Meetings required social energy she'd carefully conserved. But slowly, Tessa found her voice in planning sessions, her experience carefully edited, providing insights that improved supply chains across the Pacific Theater. Her office, when she finally accepted one, was Spartan, except for a single photo, a sunset over mountains. No people visible. Those who knew understood. It showed the hills outside the base where Delta-17 had made their stand. Those who didn't simply saw a pretty picture. Both interpretations were correct. The stolen Valor accusation that had threatened to destroy Tessa's carefully constructed anonymity had instead created something unexpected, a community of understanding, a network of support, a recognition that service came in many forms. The quiet woman in logistics who'd worn a faded jacket wasn't stealing valor, she was carrying it, along with the weight of 6 names and 12 lives, transforming grief into purpose, one supply order at a time. Some uniforms aren't worn for glory, they're worn for ghosts. And sometimes, when those ghosts are finally acknowledged by others, their weight becomes just light enough to bear.